Hey everybody, this is Tom, and today, albeit improvisationally from my car, we're going to be having an interview with the magisterial Christian Roy. He's known for various things, maybe more for his work with Charbonneau, but today we're going to be dealing with, and I just want to read from the paper directly so I don't hackney the title, some thoughts which he begins to develop in a recent essay, European Revolutions and World War as Way Stations to Planetary Man. Rosenstock-Huessy's Christian rejoinder to Spengler's The Decline of the West. And whereas at first blush that may sound like a rather specific or excessively academic constellation of concerns, in fact, the themes articulated at first approximation by Spengler, but then taken up and repositioned and criticized by Rosenstock-Huessy, and I'm not really certain if I'm mispronouncing that name, feel free to correct me, are utterly relevant.
Huessy, if you can pronounce it. Like an umlaut, you umlaut,
Huessy?
Huessy, yeah.
Huessy.
No where there.
Huessy.
Huessy. Yeah.
Huessy.
And my name, by the way, is French, so it's Roy.
Roy. Christian Roy.
Yeah.
D'accord. Désolé pour mon accent américain. Je comprends qu'on a beaucoup de peine avec leur français. Quoique c'est pas ainsi excusable. I know we have trouble with French, but that does not make that excusable. But in any event, what is discussed thematically in these essays are very germane to our present junction, which I would say it has almost miasma-like quality to it. It's confused, and there's a lack of clarity as far as our culture's trajectory at this moment. That finds reflection, for example, in my view, in the ineptitude of certain dominant discourses' efforts to, frame what's going on, whether through crude right-left distinctions or certain ersatz populisms and things to that effect. But I'm already going on too much. Let me just turn it over to you, maybe ask you what drew you to articulate these themes, and what would you like to sort of foreground as the most important moments in the essay and their relevance to our contemporary junction?
Yeah, well, I want to contextualize the essay among a few others that I've forwarded to you. The most recent of which was a kind of follow-up to what you just cited. It was about some so-called integral thinkers' critiques of Spengler. So I very much wanted to take into the conversation, along with Rosenstock-Huessy, Jean Gebser, who was another little known kind of polymath thinker on I guess world historical shifts. But in the more recent paper, I was also connecting this, really almost in real time to some of the most interesting kind of reflections going on in the blogosphere right now. I was specifically brought into that conversation, through his writing, Scott Preston of Canada, who has this blog called The Chrysalis, where he precisely draws together such thinkers who try to think about those shifts beyond the box that you just pointed to, kind of right, left, and all of that, but using a more like a fourfold matrix, a kind of pointing towards a rebalancing of the coordinates of human existence that actually several rather non-mainstream thinkers have pointed to over the decades and the centuries. He starts pretty much with William Blake, and then he has Jung in there. But I think to me the core is people who thinkers who have actually tried to conceptualize this kind of fourfold approach in terms of history, namely Rosenstock-Huessy with his cross of reality, and
Right.
Jean Gebser with his fourfold patterns of consciousness mutations. So with Scott Preston was to me a kind of contemporary intermediary between specifically those two thinkers, but I also opened it up to another important contemporary blogger and thinker and writer, Paul Kingsnorth, who allowed me to sort of bookend some of his reflections, to sort of to frame those thinkers, because I think those integral thinkers sort of have answered or gestured towards what he's also getting at. So my point in this was that some of the most interesting and out of the box thinking happening right now in those weeks and days as we talk happens to sort of revisit consciously or unconsciously these thinkers from a century ago. And as a historian, my main aim is to bring such thinkers of a century ago into the conversation again. So that puts me in a bit of an awkward position, because when I write such papers, because the material is so unknown, my priority is to put it out there, and just to almost speak, to almost allow myself to be ventriloquized by those thinkers. See, so my own perspectives doesn't always come out clearly. So by having this conversation with you, I hope we can sort of both explore these thinkers, and then maybe I can sort of articulate my own reactions to this. So
Yes, certainly.
Yeah.
Perhaps it might be useful to spell out what you mean by the notion of the integral thinkers. What is figured by that classing, and then maybe from there we can transition into what differentiates them as individuals and how they hang together, and then we can go into your response, and your response will try and make the predominant bulk of the conversation. But
yeah, sure.
What do you mean by integral thinkers, right? Or this group of them?
Well, the answer is a bit complicated, because the term is almost copyrighted by one single thinker who has come up with integral theory, namely Ken Wilber. So if you try to Google it, you'll be led there. Although it certainly has, but I've tried to steer clear of his very polymathic and embrace of all forms of knowledge and apprehension of the world over the centuries. It is clearly integral in that sense. Tracing different modes of consciousness through history that have appeared successively.
So could you say
and that somehow should be made from our vantage point to sort of be rebalanced and coincide. So,
yeah, because what strikes me from it, upon using him as a point of departure, in a way, and I'm not deeply familiar with Ken Wilber. I have a loose. I know who he is. Ironically, we have the same birthday, but But he and I. But the thing about his thought is, to me, well, it seems like a kind of mutation of perennialist philosophy, with a kind of almost like mathematical inflection to it. As I recall, he draws pretty heavily on sort of a modulated uh, appeal to certain almost Buddhistic tropes, but there's something sort of like aesthetically ahistorical about his approach. And that's why I say it's kind of almost like a mutation of the perennial philosophy. And so, would
which
it
which
be
he,
then
which is very
maybe
disinclined to,
mutation
you
is
know,
too
he's
pejorative a term?
yeah, yeah, no, but yeah, the issue is that he's actually he can't abide such thinkers because he still has a kind of progressive evolutionary view of history. You know how one stage has to follow another, so that in some ways an ordinary person of today would by the very fact of being today have in some ways greater wisdom than say the Buddha, who was in another period that logically follows the unfoldment of his
Project.
of it, no, but of his the way that he sees each stage following the other. See, so it's kind of an evolutionary sequence, and of course that's a very opposite of a classic perennialist perspective. Uh, that sees evolution as a
I,
fall
I,
from a something timeless.
right.
Perhaps
I
the
mean,
twist, yeah.
go on, go on. I mean, my response to that is simply that his, I don't know, but it seems to me that that effort fails by invoking this notion of evolution as a, and I know not just, in a biological sense, but saying that there is an inevitable progression,
Yeah,
almost like a geometric series. That what
yeah.
you've done is you've inserted a metaphysical framework, which makes that progress essentially illusory, because it's all tied together into sort of an underlying, ultimately static structure. I mean, and in one which, okay, maybe you can say it's not merely cyclical, maybe it has a spiral quality to it, but it still ultimately is characterized by a kind of reductivity. And this is why I don't think he's maybe like escaping what he's trying to escape. But we don't want to get detained
No,
just by Wilbur,
we're spending too
right?
much time on someone I don't want to talk
Sorry.
about because
All
I
right.
haven't
So
done the
let's
work
get back
enough, and
into it.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
more like he represents an effort. It's almost like maybe another way of putting these other thinkers whom you want to foreground in a different way is they're almost like they're more redolent of a kind of Renaissance perspective where you are casting off the uh, limitations of disciplinary division, right? So that you're seeing the world in a totality and trying to limit your approach to that totality through lenses of specialization or faculty distinction. That's what's being rejected. You're trying to just sort of approach the truth in its unvarnished raw totality before you apply categories to it. Maybe that's another way of approaching it.
Oh, I'm not sure. I hear two different things happening here, because it sounded for a while like I mean that the classic Renaissance perspective is of course the beginning of modernity with all that disciplinary specialization and trying to pin things down by narrowing them down and sort of making overarching synthesis from a sort of view from nowhere that is also coincides with the subject, with an outlook on the world out there. That's what Gebser would characterize as the perspectival stage of consciousness, which interestingly enough happens to sort of coincide with how Spengler, that's one of the points at which this view of Western modernity coincides with Spengler's interpretation of what he calls Faustian culture, putting the world into perspective like that, like an out there that if you put it into a set of coordinates, or Cartesian coordinates, you can master it to sort of or grasp it to infinity, to the vanishing point of actually even visual perspective, which is a palpable contrast to other modes of apprehension of the world that just preceded the invention of perspective around the Renaissance, where it's more of an all at once kind of revelatory, in the sense of things just appear. You're not in here looking out, but the space is given all at once, and objects, or more like beings of interest, appear in the midst of that all over. So Gebser spends a good deal of time on marking that transition from basically from the mythical to the mental type of consciousness, and the point being that this mental stage of consciousness embodied by, let's say, Western perspective, and also has an expiry date, which is now. It's breaking up. The mental approach of compartmentalizing, it's falling apart. It doesn't hold, and it generates too many contradictions, things that are shoved out of the picture, and that can't be held in or out. Like Rosenstock-Huessy and Gebser sees another mode of consciousness emerging. He sees it adumbrated, for instance, in modern art, the kind of, in Picasso, for instance, the kind of perspective of but an apprehension of all points of view sort of at once, and a kind of flowing, open-ended now. He sees that as an adumbration of what is coming, which I like to compare to McLuhan. McLuhan is another of those thinkers that Scott Preston brings into conversation with Gebser and Rosenstock-Huessy, who also thinks in terms of a fourfold, a tetrad. McLuhan would say, well, that's the neo-acoustic stage, because we started out in more of an audile, tactile experience of the world, most cultures, and then with phonetic alphabet and especially print, we moved to a chiefly visual apprehension, more sequential, objectifying, and with electronics, there's a sort of return to a kind of more environmental and acoustic, all at once experience of the world. So that's in the background of what I'm seeing. These thinkers, Gebser and Rosenstock-Huessy, what they're after is, without emphasizing the media and the technological background to it, they're pointing in the same direction, and a new non-linear experience of time and space that's emerging, and which the hope may get us out of the ruts of a crumbling mental perspectival consciousness stage, by recovering actually some pre-modern features, but in a new non-exclusive, I don't like the word synthesis, but a joint experience. It would be something that, it would be a new consciousness stage that, unlike the previous one, and sort of like a certain definition of postmodernity, would at the same time have access to all the previous stages. and could sort of move among these different modes of experience. That's one way in which they converge. Yeah.
It sounds, I can't think of the word. It sounds almost like, it's almost like there's a Hegelian notion. It seems to be in the vicinity of what you're discussing, which I'm not in. What is it? Bloody heck! It'll come to me in a second. It's not sublimation, which isn't really Hegelian. It's another related term though, where in the process of sort of a dialectical unfolding, there's a thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. The synthesis is actually ontologically distinctive from the prior stages, but it preserves that which came before in a new, reconfigured way.
Yeah.
And something similar is being suggested, but the trick is that they're straining for a novelty, like a newness. Or really, I don't even like the word novelty or newness. It's more that they're just trying to reconnect with the sense of vitality that seems to have been lost at this moment. So like toward the end of that paper, well, it's not really toward the end, but in the latter phases of it, you talk about how Rosenstock-Huessy contrasts his relationship with the kind of apocalyptic mentality vis-a-vis Spengler, where, okay, well, this is it. It's the decline of the West. It's all over. He's like, okay, fine, point granted. But that is not the end of the story. We can actually then go from here to something which is genuinely new. And I mean, he puts it in terms of the third millennium. But then I think you start to sort of say, well, there's even a limitation there. Like, why the third millennium? What about the fourth millennium? But in any event, the point is that you're reaching forward beyond the current junction. And now in order to accomplish this, you have to kind of renovate certain pre-modern concepts, perspectives, etc., that had been sort of occluded by the paradigm of modernity. And, then there's these other thinkers that you also found useful, and maybe you can enumerate as quickly as you would like what is most salient about them in terms of their relative sort of like tetradic notions. Or maybe you could just talk about the notion of the tetrad and this like recurring deployment of a fourfold or four-dimensional lens or heuristic or rubric, if you like.
Yeah, but then it's probably best that I stick to Rosenstock-Huessy, where that is most articulate. The cross of reality being the four dimensions of lived experience, which he approaches in terms of what he calls an existential speech thinking. So it's the four branches of this cross are really he sort of maps out elements of grammar along these axes. You have to visualize a kind of a temporal time axis and a vertical space axis. Whereas the below branch would be the inside, the subject, and the upper point would be the outside, the object, and therefore the realm of the object would be the indicative mood in grammar. It's the indexicality, show and tell, description from outside. The attitude of science, which Rosenstock-Huessy reproaches Spengler and most social scientists for adopting this stance towards the human realm, which he sees as deeply wrong, because that's humans are are not forces of nature that can be just recorded from a distance. All humans are an ongoing conversation. Speech and therefore grammar constitutes human reality as we know it, and the descriptive, objective, scientific dimension is just a specialization on one axis of this experience. Now, to go to the temporal axis, let's say the left branch would correspond to the past and to the remembrance of the past, what you call the trajective, that's what we hold from the past and try to carry forward, whereas the right branch would correspond to the future and the kind of imperative interruption of the flow of the received, what can easily turn into a rut, but by a call from a beyond that is ahead, a command or a call or an invitation, the imperative, a project. He calls that the projective axis, the anticipation, but like being called from, in a sense, from the dimension of the future. So that's why he's unfazed by the decline of the West, because he thinks that life can be reorganized by a certain opening to that call to make presence something that's incipient in that dimension of open-ended project, which can in turn revivify, the other fronts of human reality represented by the other branches of the cross. So every mutation or revolution refreshes or tries to rebalance these different fronts of human reality as embedded in language and all the disciplines that come with it. History would be, of course, and memory. The epic would be the left branch. Ethics and politics would be the right branch, and science would be the upper branch, and inwardness of all kinds, be lyrical poetry or mysticism would be the down branch. Interestingly, he also interprets that cross literally as what comes into view with the Christ event. This interrelation of the fronts of reality for him, it does actually define world history as a process, so that it is very rightfully that the dates are numbered from the birth of Christ, because that's when world history and the openness of these dimensions comes into view as something to act upon. Now, and for him, of course, the third millennium sort of corresponds to the a kind of a Christian future in an oddly post-Christian way, but it's which is also open to other neglected fronts that would be represented for him. He sort of matches Taoism to the down branch Buddhism to the down branch and of inwardness, and Taoism to the out branch of nature. You can see how that would be a kind of an antidote to the objectifying scientific approach, to have a more Taoistic approach to nature and the outside world. So he sees that as part of this coming synthesis. And interestingly, one of the most fascinating aspects, which makes him so relevant, is that the previous transformations in the second millennium, that's just ended, went through a series of revolutions in Europe that were featured in different nations as they arose. but culminating at the end of the process with world wars as themselves the greatest revolution, leading up to the third millennium of Planetary Man, which actually starts basically after the Second World War. Now, it's fascinating. And even before the war, he foresaw a post-national future where the whole planet, as such, would be in sort of direct communication to the economy, which in a kind of new kind of material ecumene, something that had been sort of anticipated by empires before, but now kind of literalized in the actual expanse without rest of the actual planet, not symbolically in some sort of region or another. But the other, with that comes a renewed emphasis on the tribal, the local, the need for roots, which has been because the intermediate, regional or limited configurations have been made obsolete by this new range of economic unification and technological unification of the planet, which in turns revives in the human a deep yearning for roots or for particular identities, which we see everywhere. A longing for the tribal, really, which sometimes is quite literal. The almost fetishization of native people, pre-modern people, pagan or magical worldviews, all that as incredible street cred today, but it completely coincides. It's in direct overlap with the actual animistic effect of the very medium we're using, of the internet. The internet, has been said before, produces tribes. Well, yes, that is the stage of Planetary Man, and it's exactly like McLuhan said, about the global village, which wasn't a kind of rubby-dubby coexistence. It means we are too close for comfort, like an actual village. We feel each other's proximity in hypersensitive ways, which call for fight or flight reflexes. That this is brought back by the technological and electronic unification of a globe that we experience. The whole globe as our village, and our identities are constructed in a very direct way on that as a projection of very particular specific identities on that global state, but in complete without mediation, without actual space-time mediation. We're forced to reach at very close quarters, or like we were all in the same little cabin, suspecting that the others might be planning something against us, or finding offense and seeking revenge, and placating the new powers of new gizmos, and turning to ancestral wisdom to cling to that, to find some sort of reference point amidst the wide open and yet enclosed space of the planet. So Rosenstock-Huessy in that way is very close to McLuhan in the way he saw things going in this post-national world. Now he had a kind of to him, the advent of that world was itself, eschatology. He has there's no transcendence in his version of Christianity. It has to be historical. So it's either that third millennium or bust. So that's a limitation of his thought, as opposed to perhaps Gebser. It's still too tied to actual historical constellation that happened or not. Whereas there might be ways of experiencing things in ways that are not too tied to particular historical constellations. Now because because yeah, he may not bemoan the decline of the West. It's very important that he points out that like it. I mean, yeah, I'm going to backtrack a little, not to make that not too many.
No, you're fine. It's necessary because it's necessary to backtrack because what you're dealing with is something which, if I am following it, we're constrained to communicate things in a linear or discursive fashion. But what you're talking about is experienced not merely in a linear or discursive fashion. So you have to go back and reiterate to compensate for the tension between our language and what our language can allow us to do, and then the actual sorts of things that we are discussing, right? So there are layers.
It's a problem that both Rosenstock-Huessy and McLuhan had, because they saw all these connections in an analogical way all at once, So right. They were almost compelled to speak aphoristically or like oracles, because it's very difficult to, even though they had almost a systematic view, but it could not be conveyed in a sequential ways. You have to intuit it as a whole.
Yes.
So the way of describing it fits the new reality, which is at the same time in some ways very ancient. That's how myths arose in the first place. It's an all at once experience of a whole complex of reality, which is very fine-grained nuances and polarities, but it's not if this and that and the next step. No, that's not how it works. So we're again in the mode of mythic sort of apprehension, which we then try to fractally get into by getting specific phenomena as points of access to the hologram of the whole,
Right. There's a gestalt.
Yeah.
So exactly. I didn't mean to interrupt, but then you're being apologetic about backtracking. And I said, no, don't apologize. It's exigent. It's built into what you're trying to communicate. You have to backtrack.
Yeah.
So, where were you going to go there?
Yeah. I was jumping to point out limitations of Rosenstock-Huessy, and well, I was thinking that first, what he provides is a kind of antidote to Spengler and that kind of historicist thinking, which of course is enjoying something of a revival. Basically, Spengler's basic idea is that high cultures, there's a finite numbers in world history, and they're like organic growths. They're like biological entities, and they have a 1,000-year lifespan. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. So what he does is take them sort of out of sequence and put them sort of side by side, synchronically rather than diachronically. So to compare each stage to each stage. See, so now among among Spenglerians is the debates are about which stage of the late Roman Republic are we now? When they make very specific correspondences between this and that politician and this and that of the Roman Republic. And of course, awaiting the coming Caesar. That's yeah. As neither to like it or not, there'll be a Caesar, and Spengler's attitude. Well, we can at least rally to that, however distasteful it may be in some respect compared to the high point of our culture. At least we'll go through the motions of that before the final collapse. So it's that's a problem with this kind of third person sort of scientific description of historical realities, because they don't allow for the cultural entities are sort of closed unto themselves, and they have a specific time cycle that is having no horizons beyond themselves, or of at least inwardness, imaginative inwardness, beyond themselves. All you can do is go through the motions of what the particular stage of your particular culture commands at the moment.
Very mechanistic.
Exactly.
It's a reduction of the human person. And he says, like, the human person is an object, right? It doesn't understand human being.
Yeah.
Right.
Humans like ourselves,
intersubjectively constituted in conversation. There is no I without the we, and the we is not something which is going to just be demonstrable. It's not like, when you write out a mathematical series, n plus 1 plus blah, 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 and then ... No, we're not just an ellipsis, and we're not just a closed series, right? In fact, through the conversation, there is actually creation, and the future is not preordained or written. Is that correct? Am I following you there? Whereas
it's true.
The undue fixation on the upper branch of the cross, the objective branch of the cross, actually takes us out of time, and thus blinds us to the creative possibilities of genuine dialogue, exchange, and how who and what we are become constituted through that. In some ways, it reminds me a little bit of the tension between Gabriel Marcel and Jean-Paul Sartre, right? Whereas for Gabriel Marcel, like, we realize freedom in our relationships. But that's tangential to what we're discussing here. I just wanted to see if I'm following you correctly.
Well, absolutely. We're not just cells in an organism, and the criticism that just voiced about Spengler, well, you could, it's obviously applies to Marx or to Hegelians in general, to any kind of historicist scheme, which sort of takes the actual, human person out of the equation. It's just objective social forces unfolding, and individuals just being cells or temporary organs, and of course disposable organs of that organism.
Let me then add, I think there's a great power in these framings, but they also then run up against their own limitations. So, for example, in the case of, you can recapitulate, if you like, the limitations of Rosenstock, Huessy. I'm going to be self-conscious about it until I get right. You can do that, but then let me ask you, from how do you see the situation? Like, what are your thoughts in terms of moving beyond what we, that's okay, they said that, we're in conversation with them. Now, what do we say to add to that conversation and move forward?
Okay. Well, there's two angles to this. One would be to interrogate the experience of space-time, let's say, philosophically, or in terms of worldview. And the other would be how to deal with the actual planetary situation which we have today, and what is the relation between that and globalism? These are the big questions, because of course what Rosenstock-Huessy was foreseeing was a situation like globalism. now, if we're too stuck in the idea that, I mean, he was criticizing Spengler for having for having these high cultures as independent boxes of kilo years, but he does the same thing, except in terms of a version of Christian eschatology, which after the medieval seer Joachim of Fiore, he sort of did this equation 3 ages, and which he matches to 3 millennia. So there has to be a third millennium to follow a first millennium of the church history, a second millennium of revolutionary national histories, and a third millennium that brings everything together. But as Planetary Man, and that's heaven on earth, Okay, so it happens in history, which is always a dangerous idea, because it's too linear and sequential still, too Faustian, I would say, in Spengler's sense. Whereas Gipser does an opening to something non-Western. I mean, he relates to very much to Zen masters and Asian worldviews generally. So what he's groping towards is a kind of non-temporal experience of time, giving I guess, heft to Blake's sense of eternity in love with the productions of time. So that would be the way, in a kind of inner spiritual way, that the different consciousness stages can actually coexist in a specific configuration that seems to be emerging right now, which sort of matches the postmodern condition, in which we do find ourselves. Actually, it's not just a planetary situation, but it's a kind of a post-historical situation, not just in being after history, but having sort of unprecedented access to the dimension of human experience through the ages, and we do have a kind of sympathetic aspect, access to other cultures which think completely out of our own parameters. So it's giving the lie actually to Spengler's assumptions, that each culture grows with its own consciousness, which it cannot communicate with others, it has nothing in common with others, and that grows and dies with it. No, actually, the whole human experience resonates in its many forms, and the idea and the challenge is to bring those different modes of consciousness into a kind of, not just into a kind of meta state where they're not exclusive of each other. And in many ways, our culture and many developments within it are sort of their anticipations of or partial realizations of that. So that's something to go on. Actually, it's something that might take us beyond the time limit of the decline of the West, and create open new ways of managing the planetary situation of flailing globalism and global environmental collapse. These new ways of experiencing time and space might give us something to hold on to, and not just hold on to defensively, but build from beyond the decline of the globalized West. Because the paradox, of course, what sort of blows apart the Spenglerian framework is that the West is, and of course underlines the gravity of our planetary situation, is that unlike other major civilization, well, the West, as at the point that would correspond with the start of its kind of spiritual collapse has proportionally increased its material power and spread all over the world, so that there is no outside of the westernized world. All other great cultures, one would decline and another somewhere else would arise and go through the same cycles. That's no longer the case. The West has mutated into the planet and vice versa. It has even created the space of the planet as a unity. That's a creation of the West, but which is no longer, maybe the fond hope of globalism was that the planet could just merge and just become the West, the full realization of the West. Well, we're now getting to suspect that it's not working out that way, and even the West is collapsing at its very center. So it's not going to happen that way. We'll go through the motions for a while, but soon we'll have sort of the deformed remnants of all the cultures, including the West, which modernity has ravaged, and we'll have to build something from the rubble, And so, but we do have some inner resources, like humans always have had, and one of them is something I hope we will not lose under the pretext of rejecting globalism or whatever, is that kind of planetary awareness. There's a great temptation to retreat into some sort of tribal safety, whether in terms of new invented tribes or calling up spirits of ancestors of the nation, or trying to LARP Amazonian lifestyles or whatever. That these are false exits. Well, it comes down to the formula often ascribed to Jacques Ellul, to think globally and act locally. I think there's no going beyond that, and that gets us of many of the conundrums of this global system we're at, and of the temptations of national populist withdrawals that we're stuck into. Is to keep that connection between the immediate, personal and interpersonal nearness, but with a kind of background awareness of this whole reach of the human, and beyond the human, to nature and the cosmos, that can be held together. I think that would be our challenge. And even as things, fall apart and collapse, I think that's what we have to latch on to, rather than hang on to the hulk of the sinking boat, as to use an image that Paul Kingsnorth used recently. No, you have to let go and swim away from it, and to maybe there's maybe a distant shore over there, but don't stick to the and be pulled by under the water by the sinking Titanic. No.
So,
swim away.
right.
And there are glimmers over the horizon, that we hope to go towards. Yeah.
I mean, as you're speaking, so what you're really saying is that we're really at a point where a reimagination becomes almost inevitable. We're not going to have any other choice but to have a reimagination, because the imaginations of the past have exhausted themselves. Thus the crumbling of the West and so on, right? Not that
of the immediate past, but that in the fourfold thinking, that opens makes possible the retrieval of older ways of being. But the trick is not to be caught up with that either, to keep somehow the mental critical perspective, and not just to sort of romantically reenact some pre-modern stage.
And this might be, it's not, I don't think it's a question from left field, but we've been talking about the West and the dominance of Western subjectivity and so forth, and the rise of, maybe we're not quite at a state of the planetary, but we're at a state of almost like the proto-planetary. But what about other human subjectivities? So for example, Chinese civilization and their vantage, how is that alternative perspective going to impinge upon with what we're dealing, right? And that's just an example, right? I mean, but because it does seem that civilization has a distinctive relationship with the historical and so forth in a way that is not sort of very neatly connected to Western subjectivity.
Mhm.
I mean, I could be wrong about that, okay, but this is just my impression, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on that front.
Well, in practice, they've massively, borrowed and and taken over and pushed to the limit, these typically, Western products of messianic Marxism and techno-capitalism. So they're completely embedded, in that Faustian frame. Of course, they bring other styles of subjectivity into the mix, but it remains to be seen to what extent it can inflect it in a significantly different way. I would hope so, but they've been so adept in a very sort of a over-the-top Western way of having a cultural revolution to wipe out, much of their history and social formations. It's not clear how they'll recover and what they'll have to contribute. And most cultures in the world have been traumatized in this way by which I'm not by forms of westernization, of Faustianization, of modernization, in ways that make it a question to what extent their own distinctive insights can be just as a continuity brought into the shaping of what's coming. I'm not disputing it. That will be part of the mix, but there's no point of the planet that is not directly affected and reshaped in profound ways ontologically by the Western modern postmodern experience, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I suppose like the reason I retain a kind of curiosity or fascination about the case of Chinese civilization is that and my impression is that it's sort of, there's the character of China, right? The Middle Kingdom, that they understood themselves as the definitively human case for the bulk of, and then other civilizations of which they were aware were sort of like derivative or millennial, or just not quite exemplifying the human. And
just barbarians, so
right.
Barbarians.
So because
to what extent will their interest in the barbarians, translate into a planetary consciousness? That's also the very fact that they're having a global reach now. It shows the extent of their westernization, because in China, they had the opportunity to explore or colonize the world before, the West great explorations. They were in Africa before the Portuguese. They had the technical means to do it themselves, but out of their own cultural viewpoint that did not have, say, the kind of religious edge that it has consciously or unconsciously to the West. It was not central to the project, and it was peripheral. They left it out.
They were willing to sort of enclose themselves. It's just kind of striking. It's curious to me. So,
well, it's actually the standard in history. It's actually the standard history. It's the West that's the exception. Is the even within Christianity, even the Eastern Christianity does not have that this active missionary impulse that its spiritual energies are not invested primarily in the Faustian way. It had to be that particular Western configuration of Christianity that has had this religious edge to actually taking hold and taking grasp of the entire known world and pushing and going where no man has gone before. That's the Faustian Western creed. Yeah, the very idea that we have a cosmos that we mentally inhabit, in our imagination and our investigation. That is actually Western religiosity. This kind of specialized beyond that is always better as being beyond, and we have to go there. That will redeem us. If you can only get to Mars, that will redeem everything. And much of the world partakes in that imaginary. It's striking all the science fiction films coming out of China or Korea. It's the variations of that Faustian theme of the conquest of space. Not just outer space, but it began with the Crusades, basically, or just the colonization of Europe by Charlemagne, by this kind of rebirth from the crumbled Western Roman Empire that sort of equated the progress of civilization as control with the realization of the kingdom of God. That's something that has an identifiable point of departure around the time of Charlemagne. The idea that the mechanical arts and the actual mastery of the physical world somehow restores Eden, and therefore what furthers control brings us closer to man's divine godlike mastery over the world, which becomes an end in its own. And now we're at the transhuman stage, where we're actually planning to build God as the completion of that project of mastery. So it's very strange, this kind of translation over space, not over space, but over time, of a certain religious idea or mentality, that informs every facet of our way of being, of thinking, of imagining, of our technology. It's in our ontology. It's the ontology in which we exist. And now it's the very fact of its exponential growth means that there are cracks in it, and I'm sort of reaching from what other lights may transpire through the cracks. Maybe there's something there's something that's some sort of a parasite of mutation within the very sort of overflow and overkill of that Faustian way of being, and that's
Right.
what these thinkers help us to get closer to, and that's what I'm getting at by putting them forward, and you're allowing me to articulate that. Yeah.
I mean, here I think it's useful maybe to turn back and look at the interrogation of our actual experience of space and time, because that to me is a serious limitation of that Faustian perspective, despite the fact that it does have a great allure. When you really sit with how they characterize the human experience, it doesn't seem to dovetail with the reality of what arises in the clearing, not to become Heideggerian or what have you, right? I mean, even sort of like psychiatric discourse, this very language to me seems so alien from how we actually live our life. The pharmacological and the biological language of dopamine and, synaptic and all this sort of stuff. Like, no, this is nothing that we actually experience. I do not experience dopamine surging or declining in my system, and so on and so forth. It's a kind of mythology which doesn't map onto the reality of lived life, right? Mm-hmm. It has a power, it has a persuasiveness, because there's a hope there. There's a hope of like, oh, I see. I just haven't had epistemic access to the actual mechanisms of this play, which is my experience. But if I can appeal to the scientist who's kind of like the puppet master, then I can like access those strings and no, that's all to me, actually incredibly dishonest about how life shows up for us, right? And I mean, it can, of course, be rejoined that I'm being slightly unfair, that kind of discourse can be redeemed. Well, yes, it can be redeemed within its own terms as long as you have open eyes and understand its limitations. But it doesn't seem culturally to understand its limitations or have any interest in letting that secret out. Okay. Quite the contrary. So at first blush, the notion that we have to look at how we actually experience time, for example, which is not an easy thing to do. That might sound like, oh, well, then I'm just a bit self-preoccupied or parochial or too limited to the subject. It's like, well, actually, no, because there's a connection between how you understand the mystery of life and set it against the broader sort of net of problems that we've been sketching here. And a lot of those problems are connected to our having been mesmerized by the promise of modernity, which is basically reframed, as you noted, Christian religiosity, right? There's a proselytizing zeal to the scientific project,
Yeah.
right? And it's quite intolerant. It's quite intolerant. So, how do you encourage people to revisit and give primacy again to their lived experience as opposed to the account of that experience, which is proffered by hegemonic secular vocabularies?
It's funny because it's almost a kind of preface to another conversation we were planning to have around Charbonneau, is to break down all these mediations we have that make the distance and the distant more immediate to us than our own experience right now, where we are sitting, that right now we are in what McLuhan called a discarnate state, when we're on the phone and of course by Zoom, we think we're with someone, but actually we're in a kind of place in the middle that is neither here nor there. We're not inhabiting our bodies really. We sort of shifted it to a kind of technological extension or medium out there.
Yes.
Part of the answer is now that we wean ourselves away from these organs surrounding us, and not us, but they're extensions of ourselves. That are they're rightfully called cells. They're more like organs, and soon they'll be inside us. How do we become autonomous and interrelated centers of our own existence without shifting and uploading the core of ourselves to these extensions over the planetary? We have to use the planetary somehow, even to reconnect, but with that local and personal experience. But we do that through the very medium that mesmerizes us into this mode of consciousness that's basically in a kind of in a dopamine dependency, of to that kind of state, a discarnate state of instant reactivity, or of pretended detachment. We're not in that lived space and time. How do we recover lived space and time? The answer somehow can no longer be in a kind of total withdrawal, or even if we move towards withdrawal, in an almost survivalist fashion, it will still be or it should still be with an awareness of this whole planet over which the human experience has spread for better or for worse. So it's that new link that we need to weave with the world that would not be entirely subsumed by our techno-economic extensions. And that's the challenge.
I think part of it is the challenge, and part of, I think, the challenge is that it inevitably entails a kind of austerity.
Yeah.
And it's never, and then you kind of like, because there's an awareness of how rhetorically difficult it is to argue for austerity. It's like, well, I mean, and most people will quickly capitulate that, yes, I shouldn't use my phone that much. Everyone will like kind of concede the point quickly. But then when you actually say, well, what does that really mean? Putting down the smartphone, and so on and so forth, concretely, then sacrifices arise. Most of them connected to social awkwardness and discomfort and inconvenience. And even though on one level it seems kind of trivial, it actually is very difficult to mount an aesthetic sort of rhetorical engagement to get people actually excited about doing that. But even then, there's the feeling that even if you did succeed, the genie's out of the bottle, and you're just displacing the problem down the line a bit. Yeah. We have to really come up with a different relationship to the technological. And sometimes I'm tempted to think that we have to maybe think almost so poetically in terms of that there are other domains and veils to reality that for which we're not accounting, and then we have to start bringing that to bear in terms of our discourses. Like I had this discussion with James Tunney, right, about granting again a sort of ontological weight to domains that are often pejoratively discounted as merely parable or fictive or mythologically. Are there in fact gods, and fairies and angels and demons and so on? And I actually will be so bold as to say that part of going forward involves reestablishing a relationship with those domains. I mean, maybe the ancient vocabularies may not be adequate, but at least they're a point of departure. And this is me speaking, not you. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I feel even more strongly in the same direction. I mean, we shouldn't be shy and coy about it. It is happening. We're all living among, egregores and gods and spirits. We're all in a new animistic situation de facto. I have no qualms about approaching this from that angle, while also keeping my feet on the ground. And I think that's part of the mutation that Gebser was pointing to. That it's just happening. We're not just speculating about it. It is happening. We're living in many ways new mythic, or especially new magical time. The magical, it's real street cred and real efficacy. It's happening. And that is in many ways obsolescing, the scientific or rational or legalistic or political ways of approaching the world. We are in that post enlightenment world. That's our new reality, and the rest is sort of holdovers. Partly, they do have certain tools that should not be discounted, that should be kept, but then there's a new equation being that is taking body, in this very problematic medium of the electronic global village. We have a kind of village totemism and animism and magic with sorcerers and perhaps sages, you know, yeah, we are there. It's the third millennium, you know, for better or for worse, it's there. And actually, I'm not, I mean, I'm glad that the West has declined to that point, you know, that it's that the wheels have come off, the lid has come off, and but more authentic forms of human experience are resurfacing at the same time as untold monstrosities. You know, it's all comes together. There's no safe place, but there's also endless opportunities. You know, to show to be present and show up and try to deal with this. It's a jungle. It's a jungle in here.
It is a time of danger and of opportunity.
Yeah.
So, and I do think that this can segue into a conversation about Ellul and Charbonneau somewhat nicely, right? You know, so maybe we can sort of round it out here for the moment, but come back and look at them and perhaps Charbonneau in particular.
Yeah.
What's interesting about Ellul, just as a sort of a quick remark, is that if one just reads the Technological Society and the propaganda and those sort of more anthropological or sociological works of his, it's a rather bleak affair. But if you then sort of supplement those with his theological writings, the whole complexion of his criticism changes.
Yeah.
And there's actually an exciting sense of the human that you can derive from, you know, the total vision of Ellul, which indicates that you have, you know, then of course we can talk about Charbonneau.
Yeah, but well. I like to comment on that, because yes, the bleakness and the hope, you know, that goes together. And it's somewhat related to Rosenstock-Huessy. Yeah, the West is in full decline. Well, no problem. You know, we can investigate that even scientifically and show that yes, there's no hope. But as there's another level of hope. That's why, you know, Ellul has two words for you know, that uses the two French words for hope. You know. One espoir, you know, for the hope that things will get better, that if we do this, we'll avert that, you know, and of course with technological society, so it shows there's really apparently no way out. We're completely in the belly of the beast, and yet there's also espérance, which is this constant human possibility of newness, of a new response to a very concrete situation that happens in the moment for every person, you know, and that's the kind of hope that both Rosenstock-Huessy and Ellul were trying to keep open, even as they underline the impasse of the dying West. You know, these a certain kind of despair of this world. It's what actually frees us for a greater hope, which is not just otherworldly, but it actually opens possibilities in this world. And that was also Ellul's wager. Yeah, that
is, and that's like, that is actually the kingdom, right, of heaven, as it were, right, which is at hand.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So it's you almost can't see that until you really do give up, okay,
exactly,
on the Faustian, and you can't make yourself give up on the Faustian. You almost have to allow it to happen.
Yeah.
Because it does have a kind of potency which can't be denied. But once you sort of see it all the way through, and then there's the surrender, that's when the scales fall from the eyes, and then you know, that's metanoetic as it were.
Absolutely.
So well, that's a very fitting consummation, I think, to this conversation. So thank you so much for the hiccups along the way, tolerating them, and hopefully we can get together in a few weeks and do this follow-up on Charbonneau and so forth.
Yes.
So
okay.
Well, merci, Monsieur Roy.
Merci.
And au revoir pour maintenant.
C'est ça. Au revoir.
Ciao. Let me just.